The city lights blurred against the darkened sky as rain poured down relentlessly, bouncing off the polished glass of luxury cars that rushed past the crowded street. Within one of those cars, a black limousine with tinted windows, sat Eleanor Hemsley, a billionaire known for her empire of fashion, power, and influence. Her world was one of marble floors, diamond chandeliers, and quiet symphonies at gala dinners. She had everything that money could buy, or so she believed. The driver slowed the vehicle as they approached the traffic light, and it was then that Eleanor's sharp eyes caught something unusual through the foggy glass. At the edge of the sidewalk, drenched to the bone, was a boy no older than 13. His clothes clung to his thin frame, his hair plastered across his forehead. But what made Eleanor's breath hitch was not just his youth. It was the two tiny bundles he cradled in his trembling arms. Twin babies, wrapped in worn-out blankets that were already soaked by the rain, their small faces peeking out, pale and fragile. The boy stood barefoot, his lips quivering as he whispered words she couldn't hear, raising a shaky hand at each passing car. But the cars kept rolling by. No one slowed down. No one looked, except Eleanor. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a strange tug pulling at the deepest corners of her soul. "Stop the car," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. The driver hesitated, glancing at her in the rear-view mirror, surprised. She had never given attention to the street beggars before, but her eyes didn't waver. "I said stop." The car pulled over, and Eleanor, in her tailored white suit and heels that had never touched a dirty puddle, stepped into the storm. The rain soaked her hair instantly, her makeup streaking down her face, but she didn't care. She approached the boy, who flinched at her presence, clutching the babies closer to his chest as though someone might snatch them away. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor asked, her tone softer now. The boy's wide eyes searched hers. "Please, ma'am, they're hungry. They've been crying all day. I don't have anywhere to go." His voice cracked, desperation breaking through his words. Eleanor's gaze dropped to the infants. Their breaths came in shallow hitches, and their tiny fists trembled from the cold. Something pierced her, something she had buried long ago, a memory of another stormy night, years ago, when she had been left with nothing but tears and silence. She swallowed hard, then knelt down, her white suit staining against the wet ground. "Where are your parents?" The boy blinked rapidly, trying to fight back tears. "Mama, she died last week. She was sick, and we didn't have money for medicine. Papa left long ago. It's just me and them." His voice broke into sobs, the weight of his tiny world spilling into the rain. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. The city noises faded. The rain became a blur. All she saw was a boy, too young to bear the burden of parenthood, trying to shield two fragile lives with nothing but his arms. For the first time in years, she felt her chest ache, not with pride, not with ambition, but with grief and compassion. She reached out, slowly brushing the wet strands of hair from his face. "What are their names?" she whispered. The boy sniffled. "Anna and Aaron." He looked down at them, his lips trembling into the faintest smile. "They're all I have." Eleanor blinked, and a tear slid down her cheek, warm against the cold rain. She had spent decades building empires. Yet here, in front of her, was a richness she had never known. Before she could speak again, one of the babies let out a weak cry, no louder than a sigh. The boy panicked, trying to rock the child gently, but his hands were shaking too much. Eleanor, without hesitation, extended her arms. "Here," she said softly. "Let me help." The boy hesitated, his protective instincts battling with his exhaustion, but finally he let her take the baby into her arms. Eleanor held the little girl close to her chest, shielding her from the rain. The child's fragile body pressed against her stirred something deep within her, a tenderness she thought she had long forgotten how to feel. More tears welled in her eyes. She looked at the boy and said, "Get in the car." He blinked. "W what?" "Get in the car," she repeated, firmer this time. "You and your siblings don't belong on the street. Not tonight. Not ever again." The boy's lips parted. Disbelief painted across his young face. For a moment he stood frozen, as though unsure whether this was real or just another cruel trick of life. Then, Slowly, he stepped forward, clutching the other baby tightly, and followed her. The driver rushed open the door, his face full of questions he dared not ask. Eleanor slid into the limousine with the baby still in her arms, her heart pounding like a drum. The boy sat opposite her, shivering, his thin body dwarfed by the leather seats. Inside the car, with the rain tapping against the windows, Eleanor studied him carefully. His eyes, though tired and red, carried a fire she recognized, the same fire she had once carried when she fought her way through the merciless world of business. But his fire was different. His was fueled by love. As the car rolled forward, Eleanor couldn't stop the tears that streamed freely now. For years, she had believed herself untouchable, wrapped in riches that shielded her from pain. But tonight, a boy in the rain with two helpless infants had broken through her armor, and what she was about to discover would change not just his life, but hers forever. The car's interior filled with a tense silence, broken only by the soft cries of the babies and the steady patter of rain against the windows. Eleanor kept her eyes on the little girl in her arms. She pressed her cheek to the infant's forehead, feeling the cool skin and shallow breaths. Panic flared in her chest. This child wasn't just cold. She was dangerously weak. "Driver," Eleanor said suddenly, her voice firm, "take us to St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Now." The boy jerked upright. "No, please, don't take them away. They're all I have. Don't let anyone take them." His voice was desperate, breaking into a frightened plea. Eleanor reached out with her free hand and touched his arm. "Listen to me," she said softly but with conviction. "I'm not taking them away from you. I promise. But they need a doctor or they won't survive the night. Do you understand?" The boy's lower lip trembled, but after a moment he nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. As the car weaved through the streets, Eleanor studied the boy more closely. His face was gaunt, his clothes threadbare, and his hands clutched the other baby as though he were the only shield between life and death. Something inside her twisted painfully. For all her wealth, she had never carried such a burden. When they reached the hospital, Eleanor stepped out first, shielding the baby in her arms from the rain with her own body. The boy followed, clinging to his sibling, as nurses rushed toward them the moment they entered the emergency ward. "Both infants need immediate care," Eleanor said, her tone sharp, commanding. It was the voice of a woman used to being obeyed, but tonight it was driven by fear. "Get them warm. Check their breathing, their hearts. Everything. Spare no expense." The nurses whisked the babies into small cribs, attaching monitors and wrapping them in heated blankets. The boy stood frozen, his wide eyes darting from one nurse to another, panic tightening his chest. Eleanor knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders gently but firmly. "Stay calm. They're safe. They're in good hands." For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe. He nodded shakily, though his eyes remained locked on the twins, as if he feared they would disappear if he blinked. A doctor approached Eleanor, speaking quickly about dehydration, malnutrition, and severe exposure to cold. "They'll need to stay for at least a week under close monitoring," he concluded. Eleanor agreed instantly, instructing the staff to put all costs on her account. Money had never been a question for her, but tonight it felt like the first time it carried true meaning. When the chaos settled, Eleanor guided the boy to a chair in the waiting area. He sat stiffly, his small hands clenched in his lap. Eleanor studied him with a mixture of curiosity and heartbreak. "What's your name?" "Daniel," he whispered, barely lifting his eyes. "Daniel," she repeated softly, as though testing the weight of it on her tongue. "You've done something extraordinary. You've kept them alive against impossible odds. Do you understand how strong you are?" His lips quivered, and he shook his head. "I'm not strong. I'm just scared all the time. Every day, I think maybe I won't be able to keep them safe. Sometimes I think they'd be better off without me." His voice cracked, and for the first time since she had seen him, the boy let his tears fall freely. Eleanor's chest tightened. She reached out and lifted his chin gently so his eyes met hers. "Never say that again," she said firmly. "Those babies are alive because of you. You're stronger than you realize. Stronger than most adults I know." Daniel blinked at her, his young face caught between disbelief and a fragile spark of hope. Hours passed, the rain outside easing into a light drizzle. Eleanor sat beside him, her thoughts unraveling in ways she hadn't expected. She had built a world where everything was calculated, controlled, predictable. Yet here she was, drenched, makeup ruined, sitting in a hospital beside a boy she had met on the street. And it felt more real than anything she had experienced in years. At one point, Daniel's stomach growled loudly, and his face flushed with embarrassment. Eleanor rose immediately. "Come on," she said. "You need food." He shook his head quickly. "No, I don't want to leave them." "They're safe," she interrupted gently. "We'll be right here in the hospital cafeteria. You need to eat, or you won't have the strength to take care of them." Hesitantly, Daniel followed. In the cafeteria, Eleanor ordered a tray full of warm food, soup bread, and milk. She watched as Daniel devoured it with a hunger that broke her heart. He ate like someone who hadn't known what a full meal felt like in weeks, maybe months. "You've been taking care of them all on your own, haven't you?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded between bites. "I tried to get work. Washing cars, carrying bags at the market. But people don't trust a kid. And I can't leave Anna and Aaron alone. So sometimes we just sit and wait. I beg, but most people don't stop." He paused, looking down at his food. "Until you did." Eleanor swallowed hard. His words pierced deeper than he knew. She thought of the countless times she had driven past people like him, never sparing them more than a passing glance. Tonight, fate had forced her to stop, and it had opened something inside her that she hadn't known was still alive. When they returned to the ward, the twins were sleeping peacefully in their cribs, their small chests rising and falling with steadier rhythm. Relief washed over Daniel's face as he leaned against a glass, his breath fogging the window as he whispered, "Thank you, God." Eleanor stood beside him, her gaze locked on the tiny babies. She couldn't remember the last time she had prayed, but in that moment, she found herself silently whispering words she hadn't used in decades. The night stretched on, and Eleanor refused to leave. She sat in a chair across from the cribs, Daniel curled up beside her, exhaustion finally pulling him into a restless sleep. She watched him, his small hand still pressed against the glass, as though guarding his siblings even in his dreams. Eleanor felt something stir within her, a longing she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was a memory of her own childhood, a lonely one marked by absence and silence. Perhaps it was a realization that all her wealth, all her success, had never filled the emptiness inside her. But tonight, sitting beside a boy who had nothing yet loved with everything, she felt something shift. As dawn broke, the soft golden light spilling through the hospital windows, Eleanor knew one thing with certainty. This encounter was not chance. It was destiny. And it was only the beginning of a story that would change all of their lives forever. Days stretched into weeks, and Eleanor found herself returning to the hospital every morning, abandoning her meticulously planned schedules, meetings, and elite social gatherings. Her board members grew restless. The media whispered about her sudden absence from public life. But Eleanor didn't care. Her world had narrowed to 3 fragile souls, Daniel, Anna, and Aaron. The twins grew stronger with each passing day, their cheeks filling out, their cries no longer weak but vibrant. The doctors marveled at the transformation, attributing it to proper care and nutrition. But Eleanor knew it was more than that. It was Daniel's presence, his unwavering love, that was healing them from the inside out. Daniel never left their side. He would sing lullabies in a trembling voice, wipe their tears with the gentleness of a mother, and stay awake through long nights when never one of them stirred. Watching him, Eleanor's heart broke and mended at the same time. This boy, who had carried burdens heavier than most men could bear, reminded her of something she had buried deep within herself. Humanity. One evening, after the babies had finally fallen asleep, Eleanor sat with Daniel in the quiet hospital lounge. He stared at his hands, fidgeting nervously, as though he was afraid to ask a question that burned in his heart. Finally, he whispered, "When they get better, where will we go? We don't have a home anymore." The weight of his words sank like an anchor in Eleanor's chest. She had never felt such a pull, such a clarity of purpose. She reached across the table and covered his trembling hand with hers. "You won't be alone again, Daniel. Not you, not Anna, not Aaron. I promise." He blinked, his eyes wide, shimmering with disbelief. "Do you mean you'll help us?" Eleanor smiled softly, tears brimming her eyes. "Not just help. You're family now." Those words, simple yet profound, shattered the invisible walls she had built around her life. For years, Eleanor had lived in the grandeur of her mansions, surrounded by staff and admirers, yet she had been profoundly alone. In that moment, as Daniel's lips curved into the faintest smile and his small fingers tightened around hers, she knew that her loneliness had finally met its end. The adoption process was not easy. The system was skeptical. Papers took time and questions were asked. Could a billionaire, with a demanding empire, truly care for 3 children? But Eleanor stood tall, her voice unyielding. She attended every meeting, signed every document, answered every doubt with fire in her eyes. She wasn't just fighting for them. She was fighting for herself, too. Her empire adapted. The boardroom that once echoed with ruthless deals now felt the presence of children's laughter. Eleanor made space in her life where before there had been none. She redesigned one of her penthouses, filling it not with gold and crystal, but with warmth, cribs, toys, books, soft rugs where tiny hands and feet could explore. When the day finally came that the twins were discharged from the hospital, Eleanor arrived with Daniel at her side, carrying Anna in her arms while he held Aaron close. As they stepped out of the hospital doors, the world seemed to pause. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, questions rang out about why the billionaire was leaving with 3 children in her arms. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She held her head high, shielding them from the chaos. For the first time, she wasn't walking alone into a storm. She was leading her family out of one. The story exploded across headlines. "Billionaire adopts street orphans," the tabloids screamed. Some praised her compassion. Others questioned her motives. But Eleanor didn't waste a moment explaining herself to the world. She knew the truth, and so did the children who now slept safely under her roof. Nights in the Hemsley estate transformed into something magical. The grand halls that once echoed with silence now rang with laughter, tiny footsteps, and Daniel's cheerful voice calling for Eleanor to watch him build towers from blocks. The dining table, once set for lavish banquets attended by strangers, now hosted bowls of soup, spilled milk, and the sound of Anna's giggles. Eleanor, who had long eaten alone, now found joy in sharing meals, wiping crumbs off little cheeks, and listening to Daniel chatter about dreams of becoming a doctor one day. But beneath the joy, Eleanor discovered something even more powerful, a healing within herself. She realized that her tears on that first rainy night had not been for the children alone, but for her own lost years. She had lived behind glass, untouched by real love or real sacrifice. Now, each day with them filled the cracks inside her that no fortune could ever mend. As months passed, Eleanor's businesses thrived in ways she hadn't expected. She poured her newfound humanity into her empire, creating charities, funding orphanages, and building shelters. But she didn't do it for headlines or prestige. She did it because every time she looked at Daniel, Anna, and Aaron, she saw a reflection of countless children still waiting in the rain, unseen by the world. One evening, nearly a year after that stormy night, Eleanor hosted a gala. But this was no ordinary gala. Instead of shimmering diamonds and cold conversation, she invited children from the orphanages she had sponsored, single mothers she had supported, and families she had helped rebuild. The ballroom glittered not with wealth, but with warmth, laughter, and gratitude. Daniel stood beside her, taller now, more confident. He wore a suit that fit just right, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes still carried the same fire of the boy who once shielded his siblings with nothing but love. The twins toddled around the dance floor, their giggles echoing like music more beautiful than any orchestra. As Eleanor looked around the room, her heart swelled. She realized that her journey had come full circle. She had once been a woman with everything yet nothing, a billionaire who lived in emptiness. But now, she was richer than she had ever been, because she had found what money could never buy: family, love, and purpose. The applause of the night faded into memory, but one moment remained etched forever. Daniel, standing at her side, whispered softly, "You saved us." Eleanor turned, her eyes glistening, and pulled him into her embrace. "No, Daniel, You saved me. And in that embrace, beneath the glow of chandeliers and the warmth of newfound life, Eleanor Hemsley, the woman the world once called untouchable, cried not from loneliness, but from gratitude. The rain that once symbolized sorrow had become a memory of destiny. The night her heart was reborn. For in the end, it was not the billions that defined her legacy. It was a boy in the rain with two fragile babies who showed her what it truly meant to live, to love, and to be human. And that night, as laughter filled the air and love filled her soul, Eleanor knew she had finally written the most magnificent chapter of her life.